Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Horror Trans. I am Stephanie Bree, a transgender woman, still a woman, and I talk about all things horror. And today we're tackling the horror icon himself, Clive Barker, who is both a horror icon and, consequently, thumbs up, a queer icon. And I'm here for it. Clive Barker has had a fairly prolific career doing a lot of great stuff. Mostly he writes books, and then those books get turned into horror movies. Um, but he has also directed and produced horror movies as well. Um, but I'm not going to pick apart his entire catalog or go through his entire career. His two most important works are the two I'm going to talk about, and why he's a god among mortals. Um, his first and most famous work is Hellraiser, which spawned an infinitely spawning franchise that seems to never die, which I'm okay with it. Um, and I want to talk about Hellraiser before I talk about Candyman, which is his other iconic film. Hellraiser is fantastic because it takes horror into the depths of the seedy underbelly of, pain and pleasure. Basically, it's like, let's take this, you know, kinky BDSM, you know, sexually uh explorative explorative culture of the queer community, and let's marry it to horror, and let's fuck people up in their brains because let's just have a good goddamn time. And that's what fucking Hellraiser is. It's so much deeper than that, but it's such an important film to I'm not going to go so far as to say queer representation because there are no um outed overtly queer people in the Hellraiser movie, but it is um it is like depicting and I have to be very clear, a small aspect of the queer culture that um unfortunately seems to be the one aspect of the queer culture that the broader um community, culture, society latches onto for better or worse. And he's like, look, people are going to explore sex. They're going to have sex in different ways. So what works for one person won't work for another person. And like the iconic line where angels to some, demons to other is very queer coded because it's like, yes, um, to some people, the queer lifestyle of, hey, just, find what works for you, be yourself, and enjoy life because you only live once, you might as well enjoy it, is gonna sound like, the gospel to some people. Um, but other people, the uptight, puritanical pieces of shit bigots, are gonna be like, no, sex is only for XYZ, and if you do it outside of that, you're going to hell. To those people, the message is blasphemy because they're like, no, I don't want to fucking hear it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to know it exists. I just want to know that, we have sex on our wedding night to get pregnant, and that's it. And then we just look at porn of trans women and masturbate in the closet for the rest of our lives and don't tell our wife because we don't want her to know that we're looking at trans women, but we're going to disparage trans women on Twitter because haha, deflection. That's our culture. So that's why this movie is so important because there's so much subtext. You look at it and you're like, yes, absolutely, we queer people, LGBTQIA plus people, are scary to some people, but we're also, awesome to other people. And I'm gonna go so far as to say we're all awesome anyways, but not obviously there are bad apples in every community. So don't come at me with, well, this trans person or this gay person did this thing, and I'm like, all right. And then I can list literally 10 billion white people that did bad things. Am I gonna say all white people are bad? No. So back the fuck off. All right. Just because you find one or two or several examples of a bad queer person doing bad things doesn't prove all queer people are bad, because there are way more instances of Christian, Catholic priest, Baptist minister, white heterosexual men doing bad things than there are queer people doing bad things. But y'all are going to deflect and be like, well, those are the bad apples. No, I have never met a Baptist minister or a Catholic priest who wasn't a bad apple. But whatever, I'm not here to bitch. So that is why Clive Barker's Hellraiser is so important, not just to the queer community, but also to the broader horror community as a whole, because he made it palatable. He's like, look, I have a message. Our people exist in a dual system of, you know, we have a dual existence in society, and this is how we survive. But he dressed it up in a horror film so that people were like, oh, I get it. You know, it makes sense, which is very, very important to us. His other film addresses a totally different demon, racism, and systemic racism, Candyman. Here you have a black man who was wealthy and was not a slave, um, who falls in love with a white woman during the post Civil War, um, you know, darkest times in American history, I'll say, because we're still living in the dark timeline. And he just falls in love with a white woman, and they torture and murder him for that. For his crime being falling in love with the wrong person, that society was like, no, you can't be in love with that person because of reasons. And so he comes back as a ghost or demon, depending on your interpretation of the film, and not only like spreads his message through fear and murder, but also um, just he specifically targets the people that um, I'm not going to say he targets the people that deserve it, because not everybody he kills deserves to die in the way that they die, but he targets people that need to be targeted for whatever reason. At least in the first film, the one Clive Barker did. Again, we're talking about Clive Barker here. We're not talking about the Candyman franchise or the Hellraiser franchise, because his involvement in the franchises as a whole was fairly limited. Um, but I argue Clive Barker is one of the greater um, horror filmmakers, and definitely among the greatest queer horror filmmakers, who definitely made a movie that, illustrated our struggle without being in your face about it. Because back in the 80s, if he had been in your face about it, people would have been like, nope. So he did the best he could with what he had available to him, and you have to commend him for that. So if you're not familiar with Clive Barker's work, get familiar with Clive Barker's work. Stay cool.